Okay. Hello, I'm Mort Kondracki. I'm a Folio board member, and I want to welcome you to the first in a series of programs that Folio is conducting on the 2020 elections in partnership with postalley.org, which is a new and very good website that you should check out, founded by David Brewster, who's also the founder of Folio. So today's program is an interview with David Domke, who's the former chair of the communications department at UW and now head of an organization called Common Purpose Now, dedicated to expanding turnout in the November elections. He's also one of the smartest analysts of politics in the area and gives regular lectures on political subjects on eventbrite.com, which you can access. So thank you to our Zoom audience. If you are Folio members, thank you for that. If you're not a Folio member, check out the website, folioseattle.org, and see what we do. We're closed physically at Pike Place Market right now, but we won't be forever. And we're doing a lot of things online, including this. I'm pleased to announce, by the way, that on our June 9th program on foreign policy in 2020 and thereafter, we're going to be joined by Gary Locke, former Washington's governor and ambassador to China, China being a emerging key campaign issue in 2020 and obviously a major geopolitical item for the foreseeable future. So, David Domke, thanks for getting us launched. We're going to talk for an hour or so, and then we'll do Q&A. The audience can use the Q&A feature on their screens. It's on the top of your on an iPad and the bottom of your computer. And Linda Jennings, who's also a Folio board member, is going to curate the Q's and A's, and then we'll read them at the end when we get to there. So, David, before we get into the election, give us a little background on your personal history, your political history, and tell us a little about Common Purpose Now, and I promise we'll get back to that.
Sure. Well, hey, Mort, thanks for having me on, Folio and you. And it's really great to have this conversation. I've been doing lots and lots of Q&As and lectures from my studio, also known as my basement here. And so I've been getting comfortable with Zoom and with this technology. So really, we can do a lot of things with it. So I grew up outside of Detroit in Dearborn, Michigan, home of Ford Motor Company, shaped very much by the working class kind of people there. Father was a teacher, a lot of sports, a lot of factory workers in my kind of extended world, and ended up moving out to California to go to undergraduate college at Cal State Fullerton. Went to journalism program there, worked as a journalist for a couple of years, and then went on to graduate school because I wanted to teach. I wanted to teach at a university level. And 20 years I've been at the University of Washington. Incredible privilege and honor to be on the faculty there. The last 11 of those 20 years, I was department chair for the Department of Communication, which has become a very large undergraduate and graduate program at the UW. I have studied and taught about American politics, particularly the communications that are part of politics. Those communications come in multiple forms, in speeches, in journalism, in platforms, in advertisements, in public opinion surveys, all kinds of different ways that communications play out. I've studied and taught about that for 20 years and began after 9/11 to begin to move into the public space and begin to do public talks to share some of the research that I'd found. And that experience was one that transformed me, kind of moving into the public space from being just a quote unquote kind of just professor at the university. I began to do talks in political spaces. I began to do talks at conventions, journalism interviews, write op-eds for newspapers, blog when blogging got to be big. All of that was like a really comfortable thing for me to do as a professor. It was that journalist in me, the writing that I'd done was very comfortable. But eventually, it became apparent to me that there was more that I could do and that I wanted to try to do. So in 2016, I made a personal choice that uh, that I would leave, or at least go on leave to check it out in 2019 when I was done as department chair. I would go on leave and try to really make a difference in the civic arena, hands-on. And the two things that I was really fixated on are voter registration and voter mobilization. Those two things are kind of two sides of the same coin. First, you got to get people registered, and then you got to get them to vote. And when I first started thinking about that, I began to dive deep as a professor into kind of the history of voting in this country. And it's a deeply racialized history. It's not one of our prouder parts of this country's history, kind of tapestry. And right now it's a deeply contested space. So Common Purpose is an organization that is really committed to voter registration and voter mobilization. We do it around the country in partnership with organizations in key competitive states. And that's the work we do. So what I've got at this point in my life, I'm on leave at the UW. I have the chance to do that as a faculty member. I don't expect to go back, but I have that prerogative if I were to choose to do that. But right now, my entire focus is on 2020 and just getting people to register to vote and to have the chance to vote.
Right. Okay. So most polls right now indicate that by substantial margins, 13 to 15 points, the public disapproves of President Trump's handling of the coronavirus crisis. They also distrust what he says about it compared to their state governors or Tony Fauci. They think everybody should wear a face mask by quite large margins. This election will be all about COVID, first, last, and full stop. You still think that that's going to be the case in November?
Yeah, 100%. I think that this election was going to be about the economy, and Donald Trump had a really wonderful story in political terms to tell about that. It's always tricky to see how much power a president really has over the economy, but if you preside over a successful economy, then you benefit from that. But COVID is this unprecedented circumstance that came and hit us and has taken over this country, has destroyed our economy, has killed 100,000 people, and gotten about 1.5 million more who have been infected by it. Inevitably, a leader has to be responsible for that, inevitably. If Donald Trump had handled this well, if he had been a very competent or even modestly competent leader, then the reality is that he would be sitting very strong right now. And so we see this with other people, governors, who have not been great governors, but are nonetheless tremendously popular. So like in New York, Andrew Cuomo has not been a very popular governor, but he's done a fairly competent job around COVID. So his approval ratings are in the 70s. Mike DeWine, a Republican in Ohio, approval ratings in the 70s. All right, here in Washington State, Jay Inslee, approval ratings in the 70s. Even Ron DeSantis in Florida, who's done a middling job on COVID, approval ratings in the low 60s, upper 50s. Donald Trump's approval ratings on the coronavirus are in the 40s. All right, so you have to work hard to have approval ratings in the 40s if you're a leader right now, because the public wants to support you. And there was a period of time in late March when Donald Trump's approval ratings on COVID, handling coronavirus, were upper 50s. They were. It was a period of time when he first started to kind of assert leadership. It was when he first pivoted to say, I'm going to take this seriously. We're going to take this really seriously. This is not a hoax. This is not BS. This is real. And so the public did what they will do. They rallied behind him. But then he started his briefings, and his briefings tanked him. So what we've got now is 6 more months, just a little over 160 days till the election. And the president will be measured on this issue, coronavirus. How many people have died? How many people are affected? What's happened to the economy? And he will be measured not so much against Joe Biden, but he will be measured against those governors, okay? And right now, that comparison is not a favorable one for Donald Trump. So, a president, if it was wartime, would be assessed on a war effort, whether it was Jimmy Carter in 1980 or George W. Bush in 2004 or FDR all the way through World War II. And this is essentially the equivalent of a war moment.
Okay. So I've heard the theory that that Trump is banking on the idea that by November people will be sick and tired of masking and social distancing and you know shutdowns and stuff like that, and they'll look at him as the opportunity to return to normal life. What do you think about that?
I think it's not a bad theory, and it's the best hand he's got right now. It's the best hand he's got. Um, if he were a president who could make a claim that that actually things were pretty solid and normal until this hit, then I think it's a pretty good hand to play. Like, hey, I was doing a good job. We were in good terms. It was peacetime until this hit. Just stick with me. I'll bring us back. But it's been a very volatile presidency until now. And what I think COVID has done is to chip away at all of the Americans who could ignore that volatility from him before. And that's predominantly white Americans and more affluent Americans. And they could say, look, I don't like his racism. I don't like his sexism. I don't like the way he treats our allies. But look, the economy's really good. Okay. And I'm making money. And I'm not affected by that racism much. Okay. I'm not, if I'm a white person. But those folks die because just the coronavirus is equal opportunist killer. So those folks are affected by this. That doesn't mean Trump's going to for sure lose, but the hill is much tougher for him. His best hope is that the economy is starting to come back, post Labor Day. I think it reasonably could be. Okay, it reasonably could be, but he's got there's not a lot of evidence that would suggest that he's got a winning hand right now.
Yeah, he's got to be betting that there's not a second wave. I mean,
yeah. There's 24. Ron Brownstein wrote a great piece just yesterday. 24 states are still going up on COVID, and 8 are declining, and then like another 15 or so. I'm not got the math exactly right. Are neutral. Okay, well, that's not great math right there. All right. Mm-hmm. And if we're reopening, which we clearly are in this country, and even though it doesn't seem like it's the wisest health thing to do, but we are, then he's really, like, the political plays that he's making are really dangerous, but he doesn't really have any other choice as a politician. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to go down the road more of kind of assessing him psychologically, but just pure politically, he's got one hand to play, and it's to try to get the economy back into good shape.
Mm-hmm. Right. So, but Joe Biden doesn't think that seem to think that he could just depend on Trump's bad marks on COVID. The New York Times reported a week ago Sunday that he's devising a multi-trillion-dollar program, not just to rebuild the economy, but to transform it. And the program leans a lot, though not completely, in the Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren progressive direction. It's not Medicare for all, but it's big investments in infrastructure and green energy and stronger worker protection laws and money for public health jobs and healthcare facilities and childcare and student debt forgiveness and special investment for African American communities and so on and so forth. There are no cost estimates of this, but it's clearly going to be a lot of money and presumably paid for by higher taxes on the wealthy. So is this a good strategy, or will it open up the Democrats to charges of here they go again, the tax, the spend, and the regulate party?
Well, I think that I do a lot of lectures and talks on this. And so on Eventbrite, there's a couple that are coming up, one on how Joe Biden can win, and then a second one on vice presidents and who he might choose as a vice president. So if you search for my name on Eventbrite, you'll find them. But I'll give you, this is a little piece of what I would say in the first one around how Joe Biden can win. In terms of the campaign, Biden just needs to be like a decent human being. That's all he needs to do. To go out yesterday to lay a wreath at a cemetery. Memorial Day weekend is also very close to when Bo, his son, died. So that, for him to do that empathy, that humanness, it's just such a contrast to Donald Trump. All right. I think on that alone, the humanness and the empathy that Joe Biden is in very strong position. Hillary Clinton should never have been treated or viewed the way she was, but the reality is that Biden is on stronger footing than Clinton ever was. So relative to Trump, he's seen as human, as having a heart and having empathy, and that really matters in times of crisis. I know your question though is more about policy, the set of policies that Biden is going to pursue. Well, I think it's really important right now to note that Biden is the most progressive Democratic nominee, this side of FDR. Okay, he's much more progressive in terms of his stated policies already than Barack Obama was, and that's really indicative of the effects of Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren and others in the party moving the party to the left. But just take healthcare. I mean, Biden has a more liberal position on healthcare than Barack Obama did. He wants to, add a public option. He wants to improve things that Obama didn't get as well as he could have. He's certainly more liberal than Obama on immigration, certainly so. So I think that for Biden to take some of the steps that you're talking about are not like a far leap. They're just seem so much further because Bernie and Elizabeth Warren were so staunchly for Medicare for all right, and for student loan forgiveness, and for a series of other things that Joe Biden was more moderate relative to them on. I think that Biden is essentially doing the opposite of what a candidate usually does after winning the primary. Usually after winning the primary, usually what happens in the primary is they have to run towards the conservative if you're a Republican or towards the liberals if you're a Democrat in order to win the base, the quote unquote base of the party. In this case, though, the base of the Democratic Party actually are not white liberals. They're African-American voters, and African-American voters are very pragmatic. And so he won the Democratic primary without having to run too far to the left. So he's actually running slightly to the left now because he wants to get some of the Bernie support and Warren support. I think it actually can be a very winning strategy, all right? That young voters believe that our government can do good, can do well, can do really good things. And the folks who don't believe that government can do anything at all or do anything much effective or are susceptible to the kind of older Dukakis-esque kind of criticisms of the Democratic Party, that's past. We're in the middle of a pandemic. Government has to function in a pandemic.
Yeah. So, and the polls indicate that people do want to spend a lot more money at the moment. The question is, though, I mean, is this program so expensive, so large, so government-centered that it's going to turn off moderates and independents and people, Republicans who don't like Trump, but also are fiscally conservative? I mean, and how important is that group?
I think more that this campaign is not about Joe Biden. This campaign is about Donald Trump and his leadership during the coronavirus and the 3 years before that. So I bet you, how Trump infamously said he could go out on Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody and it wouldn't cost him any voters. I think Joe Biden could pretty much say anything he wants on policy and struggle in terms of who he might pick as a vice presidential candidate. And it really isn't going to matter. It's going to come down to Donald Trump. Do people think that Donald Trump should be the one who can lead us past this coronavirus? So I don't think that Biden's policies are going to either determine this day or not. I think it's going to be really the human contrast between Trump and his leadership and Biden. And I think that, at this point, I think about 90% of the public is locked in on who they're going to vote for. And it largely comes down to which side gets out their vote.
Okay. So which demographic groups does Biden have to energize the most?
Well, he comes into after the primary with a lot of support from African Americans, right, or at least older African Americans. Across the board, Biden struggles with younger voters. Bernie won those voters quite handily in the primary, including among African Americans. So he would do well. Biden would do well to energize some of those younger voters. And Stacey Abrams would help that. Elizabeth Warren would help on that front. Of the candidates he's considering, that's about it. that would support, that would energize young voters. There really aren't others in that group. Kamala Harris does not necessarily excite young voters. In fact,
But wait a minute, but this policy agenda presumably would,
oh yes,
closer
yeah,
it gets to Bernie, the closer, the more attractive it will be to younger people, I would guess.
yeah, that's
Especially
exactly.
student loan forgiveness. Yeah.
Yeah, no, you're
Okay.
exactly right. There's a couple ways you energize voters. One is policy, one is your running mate, right? And he has definitely decided that he's going to try to energize some of those voters on student loan debt forgiveness,
Yeah.
on his saying that he has said on deportations that he's not going to deport any more undocumented immigrants unless they've committed crimes, committed and been convicted. So I think that he's moved that way to get their support. I think Bernie will help a lot because Bernie and he are on good terms too. But let me just say this, Mort. This election is not going to hinge on young voters. It is not. 2018, the Democrats won back the House convincingly, and they did not do it on the strength of young voters. They did it on the strength of suburban women, all right, and people of color generally. So Biden starts with strong support among those communities already. So if he's moving towards young people, it's not because he's going to fail for sure without them. I see it as more of like he really feels like it's the right thing.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I think there's a lot of Biden who wants to be a very progressive president. He wants to be that bridge that brings us into brings us from Obama to a more progressive world.
Mm-hmm. Let me remind our audience that you can go to the Q&A feature on your screen, either at the top of your iPad or the bottom of your computer screen, and there's a Q&A button there, and you push it and submit questions for when we're done. Okay, so Hispanics, young people. I mean, there really is a kind of a disconnect between his leads, like with women, and his favorability ratings. He leads among women by 14 points at this point, but his favorability rating is actually -1. Among Hispanics, he leads by 14, but the way they feel about him is 36% favorable and 37% unfavorable. So I'm just, and 27% unsure. And I'm just wondering whether this doesn't indicate some sort of lack of enthusiasm about him.
Well, I think there is a lack of enthusiasm about Biden relative to Barack Obama in 2008. There is. But it's not, you're talking about the wrong candidate, Mort, okay? The reality is that -1 among women for favorability for Biden. What's Trump? He's about -35, okay?
Mm-hmm.
So the reality is that there's two different candidates here, and Biden is very few people's like dream candidate. But he's like that person down the block who's there and is always like looking out for you and is always safe, and he's made all kinds of mistakes and he's pissed you off sometimes, but he's always there, right? Mm-hmm. And Biden is that person right now, and he doesn't have enthusiasm, like really super excitement for him, but he's got the ultimate motivator on the other side of the ticket in Trump.
All right? Yeah. So what about the Bernie brigades? I mean, he's been endorsed by Bernie himself and by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Can't get much further left than that. So will those people turn out?
I think that many of them will. He has those support. He also has here in Washington State an endorsement from Pramila Jayapal, who's one of the leaders of the Progressive Caucus. Mark Pocan, who's another leader of the Progressive Caucus. These are all folks that were traveling with Bernie Sanders during the campaign and were speaking on his behalf. I had a chance to see him in Iowa and South Carolina. We went out there before the caucuses and the primary. So will those Bernie voters turn out? I think most of them will. I think the ones that won't turn out are disaffected voters who wouldn't have voted for perhaps even Elizabeth Warren. Okay, they were really Bernie rebel, blow up the system. They're kind of like Donald Trump-ish voters too. All right, but I have been really, really pleasantly surprised by the number of Bernie official leaders, Bernie supporting leaders who have come out and said, I am voting for Joe Biden. I am. And my job is to help them build, in their view, the most progressive worldview that they can. That's what Jayapal is saying. That's what Ocasio-Cortez is saying. Ayanna Pressley in Massachusetts. And so I think that they all recognize that as imperfect as he is, he has been chosen by the Democratic voters, and he's a worldview he's a world better than Donald Trump in their minds.
Right.
So, but again, those voters, the Bernie brigades will not decide this election. They will not.
Right. Well, it looks to me, though, as though Trump's election strategy is to energize and turn out his base, which is about 43% of the vote. I mean, those are the ones who approve of his presidency, and then drive down Biden support as much as possible with negative advertising. No?
That's certainly the communicative or the rhetorical strategy. The policy strategy is around the economy, and it's around trying to suppress votes everywhere possible. That's where the common purpose work comes in. Literally on every possible front that the Republicans and Trump could fight on to stop voting, to make it harder to vote, they are pursuing that. In state after state where it's clearly legal what the Democrats are doing, that they're mailing absentee ballot applications or they're extending early voting, all of those things are fully, entirely legal, and they've been embraced by voters in those states, but Trump is nonetheless still fighting those. So this has become almost his top tweeting item, is this kind of notion of voter fraud.
Fraud,
right? Yeah, and there is no evidence for this. Almost no, like you're talking about like less than 1%, less than 1/10% of voter fraud in this country, of like actual ballots cast illegally in some way. But Trump, nonetheless, is trying to shed doubt on the legitimacy of this all and trying to suppress the vote as best as possible. And this is a very effective long-term Republican strategy. This is where the common purpose organization work comes in.
Okay, so the polling that I've seen indicates that for this election, at least, 70% of the voters want to vote by mail. So doesn't that indicate that his strategy is not working, or is not appealing in any event, or is it basically going to get decided in the courts or legislatures?
The courts do decide a lot of things on voting. They had an incredibly important decision that a judge issued in Florida on Sunday, for example, that restored voting rights to 700,000 formerly incarcerated people there. And the courts are also deciding about absentee ballot opportunities and when postmarks need to be and how much early voting there can be. But secretaries of state and governors also have a lot of influence. In New Hampshire, Chris Sununu, who's a Republican, defied the president and opened up absentee balloting to everybody for this election because of COVID. All right. In Kentucky, they've done that for the primary, even though that's a highly Republican state. So the president is losing on the voting debate. He is. He's absolutely losing on that. And I think that he is convinced, because he's seen it happen before, that if he keeps pushing a message, though, nonetheless, that he will eventually wear down opponents and will win enough public doubt, that if somehow the election is close and the balloting goes for the counting goes for multiple days in California, in Arizona, in a Michigan, in a Wisconsin, where it's likely to do so because of the absentee ballot counting, that he will somehow win in the court of public opinion around this. He is not winning in terms of public opinion on voting by mail right now. But I think that he's smart enough to know that there's two games here. There's this current stopping of the voting by mail, and then there is the sowing doubt about the legitimacy of all of this. And he is certainly all in for that.
Mm-hmm. Well, he's also, but he also is going to wage a pretty savage negative campaign. I mean, it's name calling. He's going to use left-wing socialist. Going to bring up Hunter Biden. Soft on China. China's become a big issue. I'm not sure how salient the China issue is in the minds of voters, but nonetheless, he's pounding away on it. And then there's Tara Reid, and there's Obamagate, and there's Sleepy Joe, and all of that kind of stuff. I mean, how effective is all that going to be?
My personal take is not very effective because this election is about Donald Trump. And in 2016, he made the election about Hillary Clinton. But those same techniques don't work when you're the incumbent president presiding over a pandemic. It doesn't work. So Biden, yeah, the Sleepy Joe, which is his Trump's phrase, which is trying to invoke mental decline for Joe Biden. The claims about China, the claims about Hunter Biden, the claims of Obamagate and Biden supposedly being involved in some kind of bunch of nefarious illegal activities around Russia, the Russia probe. I don't think any of that's going to stick. I don't think any of it is. And I think Trump is flailing about a lot of things, and that's where voter fraud comes in. Whereas he can just kind of hammer that. And I've been really surprised that he's hit it so much. He's hitting it so much because I think that he's not finding any other message really sticking on Biden. So Trump is trying to rerun the campaign that he ran in 2016, but he's running against a different candidate. America's at a different place. People are dying by the thousands right now.
Yeah. Well, one advantage that the Republicans do have is money. I mean, according to the New York Times, they've got $255 million in cash.
Yep.
$187 million more than the Democrats do, and Biden. And obviously, they're going to spend it on ads and micro-targeting and whatever they can possibly spend it on. Doesn't that give them a significant advantage just by pounding away at stuff?
Yeah, in a regular campaign, yes, but in a pandemic, ads don't work the same way because people know people who got coronavirus or are dying or are sick or have lost jobs. You know, an astounding percentage of Americans are either experiencing this themselves or are 1 degree or 2 degrees of separation from coronavirus or from economic job loss. So those things don't work as well. They don't matter as much in a pandemic or in a wartime effort. Also, I would say that financial advantage is relegated almost entirely to Trump and not to the rest of the Republican campaigns. In Senate race after Senate race, the Republicans have been outraised by their Democratic challengers in key races. Sarah Gideon outraising Susan Collins in Maine. Amy McGrath outraising Mitch McConnell in Kentucky. Mark Kelly just destroying in terms of fundraising Martha McSally in Arizona. So that race, that is a Trump body at war chest is what that is. Mm-hmm. And I think, you've seen a lot of presidential campaigns. You've never seen one like this, all right? Where in reality, the person who's running the kind of Rose Garden campaign, who doesn't need to go out and campaign as much, is the challenger, all right? And the person who's flailing and says, I got to get out. I got to get out there and campaign. You got to let me loose. I got to go, is the incumbent, right? So he's going to throw everything he's got. And I would never put anything past him possibly pulling this off. But I would say that on every truly empirical measure out there, that the most important ones have to do with how many people are dying, how many people have coronavirus, how many people have lost jobs, and what president handled that or did not handle that very well. Those are the most important things. So
can you think of a way that Trump can pull this out?
Yeah, I think the best route, the best avenue to victory for Donald Trump, in my view, is that he convinces enough of America that the economic crisis is being driven by these blue state governors, and that it's not being driven by red state governors because, look, they've reopened. So blue state governors, a Cuomo, a Gretchen Whitmer, a Tony Evers in Wisconsin, a Gavin Newsom in California, that if he can convince them, the public, that those folks are really hurting the economy, because obviously California is a massive economy. So is New York, that they're the ones that are hurting the economy, that the Republican governors are with him, Trump, and they're trying to reopen. that if he somehow can make the argument and get the public to believe that really it's these Democratic governors that are sabotaging. They're the bad ones, and you can't trust these Democrats. You can't trust them on the economy. You can't trust them on voting fraud. You can't trust them on all these. That to me is the argument, and that's why he's tried to turn the mask and the whole reopen into a major leverage point. He has not gotten there yet, but he is giving it everything he's got on that. I mean, like everything. He's all in terms of trying to present himself against governors, against blue state governors. He doesn't take on Mike DeWine in Ohio, even though DeWine has shut down things, because DeWine's a Republican. All right. He doesn't take on Ron DeSantis in Florida when DeSantis makes bad choices, because DeSantis is a Republican. He takes on Gretchen Whitmer and Tony Evers and Andrew Cuomo and Gavin Newsom and Jay Inslee, who he called an idiot. All right.
Yeah.
So I think that's his one line of argument. And in a deeply divided country, if you can get over the threshold and you can convince enough people that indeed Trump is the one fighting for the economy, and it's these Democrats that don't give a shit, they're trying to sabotage, and all they care about is control or things like this, then I think that's his best line of argument. And you see why he's supporting the protesters in these states. I don't think right now it's a winning strategy. It's not winning with the public, but it's a playable hand. It's a reasonable approach as a politician.
Yeah. Okay. So you think that Biden should go negative in detailing, Trump's lies and his self-dealing and his nepotism and his refusal to accept congressional oversight and his firing his own inspectors general and indulging in conspiracy theories and stuff like that? Or is it sufficient to rely on, for example, getting rid of Obamacare would seem to be the dumbest thing that he could possibly do, even to keep his own base in line. But he's done it. So I mean that's a policy issue that presumably Biden ought to use.
Healthcare was a massively successful policy issue for the Democrats in 2018, protecting and extending Obamacare. I think they will run on healthcare around the country in these Senate races and in House races and at state level races. I think Biden at the top of the ticket, though, runs on one issue, and it's coronavirus. And you run on all of the Trump statements from January and February and early March about this is just going to magically go away. All right. And hey, I don't like these numbers, so I'm not going to let people off these ships. And hey, I know a lot about coronavirus. Some say I'm a natural. All of these things he's got. I mean, the public record is all out there. And I think that you just run it on that. You run him on golfing over Memorial Day, right? So I think that for Biden, that's what the whole campaign is about. It's about coronavirus and the fallout from that and an incompetent president. But I think healthcare is the key issue for all of the Senate, House, and state races.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then there's nuances. Susan Collins will have to defend her impeachment vote in Maine and her Brett Kavanaugh vote. Martha McSally will have to defend her impeachment vote as well. So there's nuances that occur, but healthcare I think is really big at the state level, in the Senate and the House and the state races.
Right. I would guess too that the Republicans' reluctance to spend more money to have another rescue package, if that's what they're doing, they seem to be dragging their feet at a minimum. I mean that's an economic boost, would be an economic boost, which they seem to be. Trump hasn't endorsed it yet. That's not very wise, is it, on their part?
Well, polls show that the public wants more money from the government, a boost, not just money, but a stimulus. And Mitch McConnell's approval ratings, because he's seen as the key kind of linchpin on this, are very poor. They're very poor in Kentucky. They're poor in major battlegrounds across the country. So I think that a lot of the Democrats in those states will run on against McConnell too. Should the Republicans put more money into the economy? I think so. I think yes. However, this time, I don't think they get more money from the Democrats unless there's some voting support, some money for voting protections in this election. And to me, that's where the Republicans just don't want to go at all. But McConnell about 2 weeks ago was saying, I don't think we need another stimulus bill at all, not at all. And Trump was like, I don't think so. Well, now they're saying, yeah, there's going to be something. There's going to be something. So, you know, the Senate just went into recess, and the senators are back in state. They come back. They're going to come back in early June, and I think they're going to come back with some kind of on-the-ground intelligence from having been back in their states. And I think the senators will move on this, but it's not going to be. I don't see that stimulus bill as really a deciding thing at this point. Again, I think it's coronavirus and healthcare.
Yeah. Okay. So, what kind of interference can we expect from foreign interferers, and on whose behalf, or do they just want to stir up, distrust and disunity in the country?
Well, I think that is occurring, and I think that we have to realize that there's been a study recently done that shows that about half of all Twitter accounts that are kind of pushing this line of argument about voter fraud from that are echoing Trump are by bots. Okay, they're not human, or you can't tell for sure, but their activity looks like a bot activity. All right, so to me, the Russians have really found a beautiful partner in a president who found his way to the presidency, helped out by Russian interference. So I expect that there's plenty of that going on right now. And I think that had COVID not hit, it would have been chaos around that, plus a positive economy. But I think right now, again, the number of people dying, the jobs underway that have been lost, they trump everything still.
Okay, so who are Biden's best prospects for vice president, and why?
Well, he's obviously said he's going to select a woman. I think that is a really smart move. Let me say this: I think it's the right move for us as a country. A woman should be in this position long ago. But I also think politically it's smart. More women vote Democratic. Women powered the Democratic successes in 2018. Women have moved away from Trump. So it's obviously a strong political move as well. Well, you got Elizabeth Warren, you got Kamala Harris, Stacey Abrams, Amy Klobuchar, and then that's kind of the top tier group. And then you got a second tier, which is Susan Rice and Val Demings and Gretchen Whitmer and Catherine Cortez Masto and Michelle Lujan Grisham, governor of New Mexico. And I think that any of them bring something to the ticket. I do think that if he wants to be bold, then he picks Warren. Or Abrams, Warren or Abrams. If he wants to be kind of solid, then he picks Harris, Demings, Cortez Masto, or Klobuchar. All right. But I think all of them bring some strengths. I think they all bring some strengths. And I think he's got another 5 weeks or so before we get close to whatever the convention is going to look like, before he's going to announce that pick. And I think a lot of things can still unfold in terms of between now and then and around the pandemic, and see where he's at.
Okay, but does he decide on the basis of who will bring him a state, or who will bring him a demographic, or who will bring him an ideological group? I mean, what do you guess his thinking will be on that?
Well, I think those are three really good things to think about. The electoral states, certain voters, or a certain kind of political worldview. Those all intertwine, because Elizabeth Warren doesn't bring a state. She doesn't bring Massachusetts. That's already going to go Democratic. But she brings a certain political outlook that would play well in certain kind of among younger voters, maybe in the Southwest more than in the Southeast. All right. Amy Klobuchar doesn't probably bring Minnesota, because Minnesota is probably already going to go Democratic at the presidential level, but she brings a lot of support in the upper Midwest. All right. Harris and Abrams and Demings and Rice bring a lot of enthusiasm among African American voters. So does Elizabeth Warren. And I think that
Really?
demographic.
Elizabeth Warren, I thought Elizabeth Warren had problems with blacks.
Now she does pretty well with African Americans, not relative to Biden during the primary, but she actually has a lot of support. So in a CBS News poll about a month ago, she polled the highest across all racial groups among Democratic voters for the VP selection, but she was also the only one to go above 70% among both whites and black voters. Okay, so she does quite well. I think that she would do well, and so black voters they do tend to be overrepresented in particularly important battleground states. This is part of what makes them battleground states. So in Michigan, you have many African American voters in Detroit and Flint. In Wisconsin, they're in Milwaukee and Racine. In Florida, they're in Miami and in Tampa. In North Carolina, they're in Charlotte and all over the state. In Virginia, there are many African Americans. So I think that African American voters matter a great deal. I think Latino voters matter in the Southwest a great deal. So in my best guess, if I was like on the McLaughlin group or something like this, and I had to make a guess, a prediction, and if John McLaughlin was saying, predictions or whatever he used to say, I would predict that it's more likely that Biden goes with a demographic, which would be African Americans or Latinos, and that he picks a candidate who will draw well among them. To me, that's any African American candidate. It is Elizabeth Warren or it's Catherine Cortez Masto, who was the first Latina in the U.S. Senate.
Yeah. Okay. All right. It seems to me that African Americans are going to go for Biden anyway, but Hispanics, Latinx are the place that he's the weaker of the two of those two demographics.
Yeah,
so,
and Stacey Abrams really crosses over very well. She drew very well in Georgia when she ran across all non-white populations, though they were record-setting turnouts. And she has this very large presence. She's never held office, of course, above a state house seat. So that's a risk. But that's where I put her in the bold category. Like Warren would be bold for her policies. Abrams would be bold for her age and lack of experience. Harris, Cortez Masto, I think Klobuchar, they're all much safer.
Yeah. Okay. So give us your read on we're within 9 minutes of an hour, and then we'll go to Q&A around that time. But give me your expectations on the Senate.
Okay, I get all 9 minutes. So the Democrats trail by 3 seats in the Senate. The Republicans have a 3-seat advantage. But one of those Democratic seats is Doug Jones in Alabama. And Doug Jones, that's a hard hold for a Democrat ever, let alone in a presidential year when the turnout for Republicans will be very high. That is about the most pro-Trump state out there, Alabama. So really the Democrats are 4 seats down, essentially. If they win the presidency, then they get the vice president as a tie-breaking vote. So the Dems would need to win 4 seats. And if they don't win the presidency, then they need to win at least 5 seats and lose no others besides Doug Jones. All right, where do those come from? Well, the 4 seats they start with, I think that they have a really good chance to win, are in Colorado, where Cory Gardner is for sure going to get beat. Okay, it's not going to be close. In Arizona, where Mark Kelly has got a great chance to beat Martha McSally, that may not be close either. That's a key state that's trending purple and blue right now. Then you go across the country to Maine and to North Carolina, and right now those states are leaning Democratic at the Senate level. I think Susan Collins should have retired. I think that would have been the way to go out, but she decided not to. She's competitive. She wanted to stay in, and I think she thought she could thread the needle, but she never has run up against a president like this before. I think that Gideon in Maine she's the Speaker of the State House. She's a very strong bipartisan candidate. I think she's got a great chance to beat Susan Collins. So that would be 3 for the Democrats. 4 right now would be North Carolina, where Cal Cunningham, who's a military veteran, is running ahead of Tom Tillis in that state. And that's a tough state for Trump, North Carolina. It's trending purple, and Tillis doesn't seem to be able to run ahead of Trump there. So I think that's 4 states that the Democrats have a very good chance to win. So that could get them the Senate at the narrowest of control if they win the presidency as well. But other states out there also look very competitive. Steve Bullock in Montana's got a great chance to win in Montana against Steve Daines. There are 2 U.S. Senate seats in Georgia that look very competitive. Joni Ernst is up for re-election in Iowa, and her approval ratings are not great. Kansas seat is open. Pat Roberts has retired, and Barbara Bollier is the Democratic candidate, and she's a former Republican who switched parties because of Trump. And she has a very moderate profile, and I think has got a great chance there. Al Gross in Alaska has got a really good chance against Dan Sullivan, who was the narrowest of victors in 2014 as a Republican in a very strong Republican year. So can the Dems get the 5, which would guarantee them the Senate? I think they have a very good chance today. I'll say that if you go back to late January, mid-February, when the economy was still strong, it was lean Republican, the Senate. But now as a Republican senator, you have to defend voting to acquit this president on impeachment, and then seeing what this president has done during coronavirus. That's a double whammy. And then you throw over that a Kavanaugh vote in a few states that's controversial. It's a tough place to be as a Republican.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So I think it's lean Democratic right now.
Okay. So, but they're not going to get 60 votes, a filibuster-proof majority in the Senate. Mitch McConnell presumably is going to survive in Kentucky and continue as majority leader, a minority leader, Republican leader, whatever, and will presumably do everything to thwart Joe Biden that he did to thwart Barack Obama. So are we in for 4 years of stalemate under those circumstances?
Well, I think I don't know how a lot of these economic bills have to go through the Senate. I know that under some economic bills, it only requires a majority vote. Okay.
Yeah. Reconciliation. Yeah.
Right. And I don't know enough about which bills fall into that bucket or not. I know that the health care bill, the Affordable Care Act, did not fall into that bucket. All right. So the fixes that the Democrats want to do to the Affordable Care Act, is that enough of a budgetary kind of thing that it goes into the reconciliation? It's only a majority vote. What about an economic stimulus to kind of help in the pandemic? So I think that as many things as they can, they'll pass through majority votes or try to. And I think that for many voters on both sides of the political aisle, the votes on judges are so very, very important. And we are in a space now where you need just a majority to approve these judges. And I think that having control of the Senate would mean Ruth Bader Ginsburg would retire from the Supreme Court. I think Stephen Breyer might retire as well. And so I think that control of the Senate is important, not only for the economic and other policies, but as much for the judges. Trump has appointed more than a quarter of all federal judges on the bench. These are lifetime appointments. Trump has appointed, and the Senate under McConnell has approved. All right. That's really, really important. And I think that even if there's stalemate in the politics, I think that the judges' changes would be enough for many Democrats. And I don't know what happens with the Republican Party if Donald Trump loses. I mean, that's an unknown question right now. Yeah. Where do they go? I don't know exactly. You could see them going strongly down the Trumpian road to more conspiracy theory, more sense of like the system's rigged and we want someone in that vein. Or you could see some people asserting control and saying like, that was a bad drug trip. All right. And we didn't want to be on that, but it got out of our control and we did the best we could, is what they'll say. And you'll have folks like governors, like Republican governors, kind of assert control again and say, we're going to go back to a little bit more of a kind of responsible space.
Yeah. What if Trump loses? What do you think he does?
I think he does just what he does right now, which is he's on Twitter. He's a powerful communicator in our space. that he blows up the system as long as he can and stays at the center of it because that's what he thrives on. I mean, every major politician thrives on that crowd adulation to some degree. That's what they feed on. I mean, Bill Clinton is probably the closest equivalent to Trump in terms of having to have that, and that's part of what got Clinton in so many problems and so much trouble. But Clinton never had the forum on Twitter and the ability to kind of insert themselves into the everyday discourse that's out there. So I think Trump gets that. He starts his own media company, or he goes off to Fox and is on that all the time, or OANN and he's on that all the time. So I don't think he disappears in any way, shape, or form. He will not look at all like the former presidents that we've seen before.
Yeah, right. Okay, let's. I told you I would give you a chance to talk about comic now, and I'm sorry we're so late. But okay, so what exactly are you doing to foster turnout and registration?
Sure. So you know, we are an organization that has thrived on doing on the ground voter work in 2018 and 2019. We worked in 12 states in 2018 to register voters and then to mobilize voters. We worked in 7 states in 2019 for the same kind of thing. And we had 20 states on our map for 2020. When COVID hit, all of that on the ground work just had to go away, all right? And it had to go away for all political entities in this country. Nobody's campaigning door to door in this country these days. So we've pivoted to do all of our work remotely. And our 2 main lanes of remote activity are advocacy work and absentee ballot and early voting support work. So one side of the coin is advocacy work, which is we're pushing on senators, governors, and secretaries of state in key states to get them to expand voting for this year, to make absentee balloting more easy, to make COVID-19 a legitimate excuse in this election to get a mail-in ballot. And we've had some successes in states, in Virginia, in New Hampshire, in Michigan, one just the other day in Montana, even one in Oklahoma. We've had some successes with other organizations pressuring officials to do the right thing. So that's on our website. If you go to if you came to commonpurposenow.org, that's the website, you would see an advocacy page and it's step-by-step how to do this. We've got the contact info. It's all easy for you. The other side of the coin is that voters need to know what to do in this election because only 20% of American voters have ever cast a ballot outside of a traditional polling location. So they don't know how to request an absentee ballot. They don't trust an absentee ballot system. They don't know if how to provide the kind of voter identification they have to provide in a number of states. You often have to provide proof of who you are. So it's really complicated. So we did a lot of work around voter education for the 2 elections that we've recently had in Wisconsin, where we called into Wisconsin. We're making calls now into Arizona, into Georgia. We're going to start calling into Maine at the end of this week. We're being asked by state parties and by nonpartisan organizations to help voters to figure out how it is that they even get absentee ballots. So the first side is the advocacy, getting officials to do the right thing to expand voting this year. The second side is helping voters to navigate the system. That's what we're doing. And that second side is under our National Fieldwork tab. And we also do that same kind of work in Washington, and we have a Washington Work tab. Those 3 tabs are our hands-on work. We're an on-ramp to civic engagement. We try to make it as easy as possible for people to engage and be part of the political process from their home or when they can travel,
Right. I think it's important for people to know that it's not you operating from your basement. It's 2,000 volunteers, right, that you've got.
Yeah, so this is an organization that started in 2018, and that we now started from a bunch, all volunteers, something that I was doing on the side as a professor at UW, to now 8 full-time staff, 2,000 plus volunteers, 900 donors because we're entirely privately supported, 20 states, more than 36 partner organizations across the country, more than 100,000 voter contacts in the last 2 years. So it is a very large organization, and I was there at the beginning. I'm still there now, but it is a really big team effort. And one of our core kind of principles is supporting and kind of raising up next generation leaders. That means we work and hire really diverse, outstanding young people. And I just get the privilege to work with them. It's like working with incredible, talented University of Washington students all the time, like all the time.
Okay. Thank you, David. Okay, so you're not done yet. We've got a bunch of questions out there. Linda Jennings, take it over and tell us what people are asking.
Hi there.
Hey, Linda.
Good to see you, and a great conversation you're having. David made the point that this election is all about COVID. So one participant asks, if there's a promising vaccine candidate just around the corner in October, what kind of difference might that make, David, in the election?
Yeah, that's a great question. It is something I've been thinking about. That's what Trump's saying. He's saying there's going to be a vaccine by the end of this year. And if it's not by the end of this year, it's going to be early next year. So he wants to he's positioning himself as the one who's made this happen. I think that if we somehow get a vaccine and it would be a darn near health miracle to come that fast. All right. If we somehow got one, and Trump played a role in that, then Trump deserves some credit for that. I may disagree with this man on so many fronts and not think he's the right man to lead us right now. But if he somehow played a role in getting a vaccine and made a certain set of calls and marshaled resources in certain ways, then he would deserve that credit. And that could help him in this election, tremendously so. I think he's got a much better shot to get the economy recovering than to have a vaccine by then. I'll believe the health experts who say that, the likelihood of us having a vaccine before early 2021 is very unlikely.
20% unemployment
Okay.
rate. To 20%.
What about on Biden? One person asks, does he have a problem in that he doesn't really understand present day identity politics? Thinking about the trouble that he got into recently with the comment he made about African Americans and Trump. Or is it the opposite? And the Democratic left has an identity politics problem?
There's a lot in that question right there. Okay, so let me kind of answer it in different pieces. I think that everybody, that America is fundamentally in the middle of identity politics all the way around. That what Trump has marshaled is white identity politics and white male identity politics. So that white identity and that white male identity has really been vital to Trump's support and success, and the white nationalist movement behind him has mobilized substantially. On the left, over time, there are other identities that have mattered, whether it's female, whether it's persons of color, particularly African Americans, Latinx, or people who identify as LGBTQ, or immigrant populations. Biden is without a question a flawed candidate in that universe. He is. But he's also a known candidate in that universe. And one of the things that an awful lot of research has shown in political science circles is that the only purists that we have in American politics in terms of voters are white voters. All the non-white voters, and then particularly white women, understand that they're dealing with a system in which compromises have to be made, that things do not go as they would purely like them to go. So they're much more pragmatic. So in Jim Clyburn in South Carolina's really famous words in this election when he endorsed Joe Biden 3 days before the South Carolina primary, he said, look, I know Joe Biden. We know Joe Biden. More importantly, Joe Biden knows us. All right. And so when Biden says what he said the other day, yeah, it hurts him, but it also is part of Joe Biden's kind of imperfections. And I think that the Democratic Party has come to terms with the fact that that's who Biden is, and they picked him. They did. And if Biden picks a female vice presidential candidate who can vouch for him to some degree on these issues, that's enough. That's enough. Let's say Biden was running against a reasonable president who wasn't constantly kind of implementing immigration bans or making murderous conspiracy claims or arguing that people of color are dangerous for our society, then Biden might not make it, might not have made it to begin with, and would be not able to get voters out of the Democratic side. But Trump is not that candidate. Trump is, for many people of color, for many women, for many immigrants, for many LGBTQ voters, he is their worst nightmare.
So some other people are asking about both Obama and Bernie Sanders and Barack Obama. What can they each do best at this point to help defeat Trump and Biden win?
Yeah. Well, Barack Obama has made it very clear that he is going to campaign substantially for Joe Biden. He's going to do it because he cares about Joe Biden. He's going to do it because he believes in the issues and the positions and where the country's going that Biden represents relative to Donald Trump. But he's also going to do it because his legacy is on the line here. Obama's legacy is on the line more than even in 2016. This is his vice president. This is the guy who wants to extend Obamacare, right? So Obama is going to play an enormous role in this. And I think, and by Obama, I should make that plural. I think the Obamas will play an enormous role in this campaign. So that's going to be valuable for Joe Biden. Bernie Sanders is going to also play a very important role, and already is. He's built these, he's agreed to these joint policy working groups between Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders. He has spoken warmly, Bernie has spoken warmly about Joe Biden. I think he will campaign for Joe Biden extensively. I think that he will also do it because some of his legacy is on the line too, that he wants some of the issues that Biden is kind of gravitating towards, but Bernie wants to be able to claim credit that Biden moved that way, all right? So I think that for a whole host of personal, professional, national reasons that the Obamas and Bernie will be fully invested in a way that they kind of thought they could get by in 2016 without putting all their capital out there. And that isn't the case now. It's like everything's on the line.
Well, with everything on the line and the country, as you said, deeply divided, what are the chances this time of another Democratic popular vote victory and electoral college disaster?
It's pretty good. The chances are pretty good. So the last time, since George H.W. Bush won the presidency in 1988 with a very large majority, the Republican candidate has won the popular vote only one time. George W. Bush in 2004. Since then, the Republican candidate has lost the popular vote in 92, in 96, in 2000, in 2008, 12, and 16. So if a Republican's going to win the presidency at this time, it's hard to see this particular Republican winning the popular vote. I think that if Trump were to win the presidency this time, that I would go right now to Vegas and put whatever discretionary money I have, which is not much because I've been a professor, but I'd put whatever discretionary money I have on this reality that if Trump is going to win, he will win without winning the popular vote. And that he would be the first two-time president in American history. Is getting some comments from back there? He'd be the first two-time elected president in American history to have lost the popular vote and to have won the electoral college vote. Because when you look at the numbers of voters in California, in New York, in these large population states, Trump is going to lose massively in those states. And he still might win enough of the electoral college, though, to win.
Yeah, right now, it should be said that he is behind in almost every battleground state. Trump is. Yeah,
he is behind in every battleground state. If you take the Michigan, the Pennsylvania, the Wisconsin, the Florida, he's neck and neck in Ohio. He's actually neck and neck in Texas. Mm-hmm. He's in Arizona. He's behind. He's behind in Colorado. So I don't think Trump wins the presidency and wins the popular vote. I think he wins the presidency without winning the popular vote again. And my God, what are we going to do if that happens again? Well, I don't want that. Nobody wants that.
So if people can travel with the work you're doing, somebody was asking, where should a native Seattleite show up to stand in solidarity and work this election?
So if they can travel and they're a native Seattleite, I'm gonna take a presumption that they're trying to vote for the Democrats. They want to support the Democrats. If I was them, I think that I would go to Milwaukee, Wisconsin. That would be ground zero for this presidential election. Whoever wins Wisconsin will be president of the United States. Whoever wins Wisconsin. I would go there. I would go to the suburbs of Pittsburgh. That's a really important battleground area. I think you can win. I don't think Pennsylvania is as tipping point as Wisconsin, but it's very close. And I would go to the suburbs of Detroit. Those would be the places. Oakland County, the famous Oakland County where the Reagan Democrats were. That's where these elections are going to be decided, in the suburbs of predominantly African-American cities, surrounded by suburbs, which are mixed race in their population and have swung towards the Democrats. That's where these elections will be decided. If they don't want to travel outside of the West and they want warm climates, then they should go to Maricopa County in Arizona, where this election will also be. If Biden can win in Arizona, then he will win this presidency, and he's got a great shot.
Then who should they talk to?
Well, they should talk to us before they go, because we'll take you there. We'll lead you there, right? But if you're going to go on your own, then the only really way to do that is to contact the campaigns directly and say, like in Arizona, I want to work with the Mark Kelly campaign for Senate because Kelly's also going to be supporting Biden. Or in Michigan, I want to work on the Gary Peters Senate campaign because it'll also be supporting Biden. So that would be who they would talk to, those campaigns.
And they can talk to the DNC and the state party.
The DNC will do nothing to help you. All right. Look, we are not an arm of the Democratic Party, common purpose. We are not. The Democrats are as fucked up as the Republican Party is. Okay. They are.
We got my grandchildren around this phone.
Okay.
This call. Watch your
Sorry,
language.
but this is, look, I'm in my basement. I can say this, okay? I understand that. The reality is that the Democrats are as messed up as the Republicans. That said, they as a party do support voting. They do. And the Republicans don't. So the reality is that's why we support them. The DNC is not a very helpful arm, but the state parties, they can be very helpful. But even better than that are the specific campaigns, because their own livelihoods are on the line, right? Yeah. So if you want to beat Mitch McConnell in Kentucky, you could talk to the Kentucky Dems, or you could talk to the person who comes out of the Democratic primary, probably Amy McGrath. They would want you to come.
So going back to the start of your career as a journalist, and the media comes in for a lot of criticism. So what do you think the political reporters are getting right? And what would you suggest they do better? I'm sure it's a short list.
I think the biggest mistake that has occurred since Trump came down the escalator in New York and announced his candidacy in 2015, the biggest mistake is that this has been the Trump show nonstop. That Trump is front and center to every single thing. His tweets set the agenda for the press on a daily basis. The press I understand the presidency is the most powerful position in the small d Democratic world. I got that. I understand that. But the reality is that this president himself has been, we consistently hear from Republicans that they can ignore him and run their own agendas. So the issues around healthcare, the issues around education, so many, the cages at the borders, all of these things could actually lay bare the values of this country much more than paying attention to Trump's tweets about Joe Scarborough. All right. I'm offended by what Trump tweets on a daily basis. But to me, it's like the magician who's saying, look at my hands over here. Watch me, watch me, watch me. While they're doing this other thing over here. And that's the mastery of Trump. That is the genius of Trump. And it's been that way long before he entered politics. And the press can't do any, they're like in this codependency relationship. They can't break it. And then if they try to break it, they're the people who tune in to watch or or pay the subscriptions. They say, come on back. We want to see what Trump's doing. And so it's this really unhealthy codependency relationship.
Oh. And if Trump does lose in the fall, what are the chances of his running in 2024?
I think anything's possible, but I think it will come down to which way the party goes if he loses. If the party somehow turns course and says we're the party of, that we claim to have been for a long time, foreign policy of kind of real politics kind of foreign policy, and then like fiscal conservatism and social conservatism, none of which Trump manifests, none. Okay, then I think that Trump's not a candidate in 2024. But if the party is what it is right now, which is really the cult of Trump. That's a lecture I recently did, but it's not I didn't invent that terminology. It is a strong cult of Trump. Lindsey Graham exhibits this. Like, you can be against Trump, and then as soon as Trump becomes president, you can be like his best friend, because your political future depends on it. If it continues to be the cult of Trump, whether it's either in ideology or in personality, then I think Trump could come back and run in 2024. Absolutely. I don't think it will happen if he loses, because I think that he will lose in such horrible terms. Like, that period of time from election day to inaugural day, to me, there is no betting what that would look like. I don't even want to think what a lame duck congressional session would look like if the Democrats have won the presidency and the Senate, but don't have control of that until January 20th. I have no idea that what Donald Trump and Mitch McConnell could do in that lame duck session.
Well, to wrap up perhaps on a less dire note, when we talk about the number of people who traditionally haven't been voting, what can each person listening now do as an individual, even if they don't have time to work with your organization or another? What can each of us do to help get more people voting?
Well, there's a lot of organizations around the country that are 100% nonpartisan, that could use money. There's a couple of really great organizations that we work with that are totally 100% nonpartisan. They just want to help people to vote. You Can Vote is a really small, robust organization in North Carolina. The Florida Rights and Restoration Coalition, 100% nonpartisan in Florida, trying to restore voting rights to formerly incarcerated people, is a great organization that could be supported. So that money is always really valued by these organizations because they never have enough. They literally don't have enough for their volunteers. But you can also make phone calls for these organizations. You can find them online, and in this remote COVID world, you can make phone calls into communities, and they set up the software apparatus where you're calling people to try to encourage them to vote. You're not offering a partisan script. You're simply trying to help people to know whether they're registered to vote. Do you know how to get an absentee ballot? Do you know if you are legally able to register to vote? Do you know where you would vote? Do you intend to vote? All of that. So to me, it's if somebody wants to make a difference, an organization such as us is an easy on-ramp to this. But these other organizations are really committed to this work too. So just as an example, just to try to make this as easy for people as possible, if you go to cpnow.org, go to the More button, click on the More tab, and you scroll down and there's a partners list. On that partners list are more than 24 national partners that we work with across the country. They're listed. About half of those are entirely nonpartisan organizations. Any one of them would be thrilled to have resources or time from people in Seattle. And that is one thing that a lot of Seattle people have, are resources and time.
The entire political reform movement is nonpartisan, trying to open up the system to more choices and stuff like that. The best of them is Represent.us, which is now totally dedicated to vote by mail. And there is an organization called VoteAtHome.org that is also involved in the space. So it's now we've got maybe time for two more questions.
Yeah, I was looking for a book over here on my bookcase. Mort's got all his books behind him. Mine are over on the side over here. And I'll recommend two books too, okay, Linda? One is called One Person, No Vote. There was a famous court case in the 1960s that instituted the rule of one person, one vote, which just said that all legislative and congressional districts in the country had to be drawn with equitable numbers of people in them, so that somebody who had a vote in one district was equivalent to a vote in another district. Dr. Carol Anderson has written a really great book called One Person, No Vote, that is about voter suppression tactics that have been put into place since the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And then another one is Ari Berman's book, Give Us the Ballot, which is also about voter suppression and the tactics that are involved in that. I don't start out as somebody that is desiring to support Democrats. I start out as somebody that wants people to vote and have the chance to vote. And these books convinced me that there is one party that's trying to make it easier and one party that's not.
Mort, did you want to ask anything else before we?
No, I think we'll wrap this up. Thank you all for being with us. Now you've got three definite websites to check. One is commonpurposenow.org. Another is folioseattle.org, and the other is postalley.org. All of them cooperating on this webcast. And I invite you to, those of you who are not members of Folio, to join, and I invite you to sign up for our June 9th session, where we'll have Dan Chiro and Rashat Kasaba of UW, and Gary Locke, and also Carol Williams, who used to be a foreign correspondent for many years in Russia and Eastern Europe. So thank you all for joining us tonight for the first of our what may be 6 for sure, maybe 7 programs from now through November. So thank you very much, and thank you, David, for spending all this time with us. I really appreciate it. And Linda, thank you too.
Thank you, Mort. Thank you, Folio. Really appreciate the chance to talk about these really important issues.
Okay. Good night, everybody.